This is Cow Bites, the technical segment for the Cow Talks podcast, with your host, Marcelo Wallau, Forage Extension Specialist for the University of Florida. Pasture establishment is the most important and also the most expensive phase in a pasture production system. After all, if we cannot get a pasture well established, there is no pasture to work with. To facilitate our discussion here, I'm going to make two big distinctions. First, in terms of plant material. Second, in terms of land prep. In terms of plant material, we have two basic groups. We have forages established by seed, which are most of our forages, like Bahia grass, our annual warm season grasses such as sorghum Sudan, pear, millet, cowpeas, and sun hemp, and our cool season forages such as the rice and oat and ryegrasses and clovers and brassicas. Those are normally easier to establish and are the most preferred by farmers. On the other side, we have forages that are established using vegetative plant material. Three main forages used in Florida are established using vegetative plant material, which are Bermuda grass, limper grass, and perennial peanut. This is a clonal method of reproduction and uses either tops, the stems or stolons or runners, or sprigs, the rhizomes, to establish a new pasture. Limper grass is always established using tops, while perennial peanut is using rhizomes. Bermuda grass can be established using both tops and sprigs, but some varieties establish better using sprigs than tops like Tifton 85. And the other thing is that rhizome is destructive. We need to dig those rhizomes from a mature pasture. In either case, when we're talking about vegetative plant material, it's very important that we use mature plant material and mature and very well fertilized plant material. And it's going to be planted very shortly after harvest. Timing matters a lot here. For sprigs, we're normally planting them during the winter when it's the best timing for the maximum reserves on the rhizomes, and that's when our warm season perennial forages are dormant. We can also plant using sprigs in the summer after they replenish the reserves. Note that the flush of growth in the spring is supported by the reserves in the roots and rhizomes. In using tops, we always need to establish during the summer because that's when we have active growth. Weather conditions are very important in either case. We need to make sure we have moisture whenever we're planting to give the pastures a better chance to establish, and always keep an eye on the forecast because planting in a dry weather will be a problem. The second biggest distinction is between prepared seedbed or overseeding into sod. On prepared seedbed, we're talking about tillage, disking the land, tilling the land, and we're coming into normally clean and well-prepared seedbeds. Forages planted using vegetative plant material always need to go into a prepared seedbed, and normally our perennial forages are going to be established on prepared seedbed. It's normally easy for weed control because we have an array of herbicides we can use, broad-spectrum herbicides and tillage methods we can use to control weeds and deplete that weed seed bank. Overseeding is normally used for implementing annual cool season forages on top of warm season perennial pastures. This is a very common practice in Florida, where we're planting normally cool season grasses such as ryegrass and oat and rye on top of Bahia or Bermuda grass pastures when they are dormant. We normally assume a lower productivity and a late production compared to prepared seedbed, but also this method has the advantage of not being destructive. When I think about pasture establishment, I like to think in 5 P phases: planning, prepping, planting, priming, and putting to use. Planning starts well before we get to the field. We need to plan ahead of time. And our first decision is what to plant. The choice of forages is going to depend on what grows in the area, what cultivars are better adapted to our area and to our objectives, our production goals, and our management practices. It's important to see what varieties are recommended for each region and for the different purposes of use. We're going to take soil samples and look into nutrient levels and also pH, because if pH is low, it's going to take several months to get to that target pH for us to plant. The second phase is actually preparing the land, and this is for both prepared seedbed and for overseeding. The goal here, the overall goal here, is to have a clean and well-prepared or well-prepped area for planting to give the pastures our best chance to establish. Preparing the ground is very good to start early, especially if there is a high weed pressure. A series of tillage and broad-spectrum herbicide application can help exposing the seed bank and killing those weeds present. It's well worth the investment because, especially when we're talking about perennial pastures, our investment is in the long term and is much easier to control the weeds prior to establishment because there are many more herbicide choices and normally cheaper than whenever we try to control them afterwards when herbicide choices are limited. It's also a good time for incorporating the lime and some of the base fertilizer like phosphorus and potassium if needed. When planting into sod, we also need to prepare the land. Prepping means reducing the competition from the warm season perennial grass here. Ideally, we would plant over sod whenever our warm season perennial grass is dormant. But in Florida, many times that first frost comes way too late, in mid-November to mid-December. That means we're going to have a late use of that pasture. A few other strategies such as a heavy grazing with mature cows or mowing pretty short helps reducing the competition. Chemical burn down is also a choice with a low rate of a systemic herbicide such as glyphosate or a contact herbicide such as paraquat, but might have adverse effects, delaying the green up in the spring and also affecting persistence of the pasture if this is used frequently winter over winter. Another choice that's especially good when we're broadcasting is a light disking. This helps increase the seed to soil contact and set the warm season grasses back without definitely killing them. However, it also can expose more weed seeds and can result in weed problems later on. Our third phase is planting, the actual planting. And the planting method is going to depend on what is being planted and where, and what's the machinery available. Let's go over a few. Using seeds, the preferred choice is with the seed drill. A regular drill would be good for prepared seedbed, or a no-till drill for both overseeding on sod or into prepared seedbed. Normally, drills are more expensive and many farmers don't have access to those, and they use a broadcast spreader. A broadcast spreader is pretty handy but also limited in what it can do. We need to ensure a good seed-to-soil contact, especially if we're working with large seeds. When broadcasting, for example, oat or rye or sorghum and millet in the summer and cowpeas in the summer, we need to broadcast into a prepared seed bed and then use a cultipacker or even a disc to lightly bury the seeds and pack the ground behind it. When we're overseeding on sod, the only choice for the winter are ryegrasses and clovers. We also need to assume we're going to have a lower productivity and a late production when overseeding on sod, especially if we're just broadcasting. It's important to make sure that we have an adequate seeding rate corrected to poor and viable seeds, and note the coating and weed percentage in the label because that's going to affect our seeding rate, and also the correct seeding depth. Shallow seeding depth means the seed can be exposed and dry out, and deep seeding depth means that the seeds might not have energy to emerge or will delay emergence. Make sure the drill is well calibrated and clean. Clogged pipes are a normal issue when the drills are not used frequently, and also calibrate prior to use. Don't trust the calibration charts. They're a good strategy to set up the base calibration, but to refine is always preferred if you can go ahead and calibrate it by weight or seed count. Whenever we're dealing with vegetative plant material, that needs to be spread on a prepared seed beds, disted in, and packed. It needs to be a timely and quick process, especially in the summer, because when we're planting with tops, they can dry out quite fast. Having someone in the tractor already disking it in as people spread is advisable. And again, always use mature and well-fertilized planting material. Our fourth phase is priming. We're talking especially about fertilization and weed control here. Remember, our goal is to get that pasture established fast, to avoid weed encroachment, and also to be able to use it as early as possible. Florida soils are generally poor. They have low levels of nutrients. And plants need nutrients early on. However, small plants cannot uptake a lot of nutrients. We need to be careful with heavy fertilization in the beginning because it actually can increase weed incidence. Our recommendation is a small rate of fertilizer right after emergence, maybe 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen, 40 pounds of potassium of K2O, or half the rate in case it's more than that, and also we need to pay attention in other nutrients, also phosphorus, sulfur, and some of the minors. We come back with a second fertilization with more N and the remaining K if needed, once plants are big enough and canopy is already covering over half of the ground surface. This way, we avoid some of the weed encroachment and we make sure our nutrients are used by the plants we're establishing. Weed control is our second point here in terms of priming. It really depends a lot on the weed to be controlled and on the forage species we are controlling the weeds out from. Again, the best control is before planting, in that prepping phase. In this priming phase, herbicide options are quite limited, and it's best to hit the weeds when they are small. But small forages can also be more susceptible to herbicide, even if they are labeled for use in established pastures. So pay attention to the label. Check our materials and our recommendations for more information on herbicide application during pasture establishment. And the last phase is putting it to use once the pasture is established and not before. This is very important that we give the chance for the pastures to establish well before we start using it. The time frame really depends on the forage being used. We can assume probably around 45 to 60 days for many of the annual forages, especially if well fertilized, and up to 2 years when we're talking about some of the perennial forages like rhizoma peanut. It's very important to respect the establishment phase before we put it to use. Too early grazing or cutting can jeopardize the productivity and the persistence of that pasture. It weakens the plant and results in more weed encroachment. Grazing only after the plant closes canopy is a good strategy, but sometimes a light grazing early on in the season can help inducing tillering and breaking apical dormancy. I'm very careful about recommending that because it needs to be a light grazing, and when animals are removed from the pasture, we still need plenty of leaf area to ensure subsequent growth. Follow those basic steps, and it can improve a lot your chances of success when establishing a pasture. For more information, refer to our written material and some of the videos we put with strategies for establishing the different types of pastures we can grow in Florida. This podcast was produced by Marcelo Wallau and Ashley Kuhn and brought to you by the University of Florida IFAS Forage team.